All right, I think we're going to get started because we have a lot to cram into an hour, and we do our utmost to get you out on time. I will introduce myself, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sam to introduce herself. I'm Charlotte Stevens. I spent close to 40 years as a labor and employment attorney in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. Also did work in all of the other New England states other than Rhode Island, I figured out. So pretty good exposure to all of New England. My primary work was in labor and employment, did mostly management side. So did a lot of trainings back then. I retired from my law firm at the end of 2021 and started a part-time consulting business, allegedly part-time, retirement gig where I do workplace trainings, investigations, conflict resolution, mediation, and some strategic human resource consulting. So a little bit of everything. So I've been doing this a long time and have seen a lot of changes in the world of employment since the 1980s. So this is Sam.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam O'Neill. I'm a human resource executive. I've been in human resources for 30 years. I started when I was 5. So yeah, 30 years in corporate. And in May, I decided I was tired of corporate and I opened my own consulting business, Forge Point Solution Group. I also do trainings, investigations, day-to-day HR for small to mid-sized companies who don't have an HR department. I also do one-on-one coaching for leadership managers and executives.
So I'm going to start by giving you a little roadmap, if you want to go to the next slide, of
yeah, that's my job.
What we're going to do today. We're going to discuss the meaning of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which you think might be simple, but these days it's not so simple, given what I would call, I guess, the backlash against DEI that we've seen over the last couple of years. We're going to talk about discrimination, laws and practices, and I understand that you recently had anti-harassment training, so this will kind of fit in with that. Clarify misperceptions about discrimination, equity, and inclusion. Again, those terms take on different meanings depending upon who you're talking to, so we're gonna talk about that a little bit. This is a class participation event, so we welcome questions. You're perfectly welcome to push back on us and challenge us a little bit. Sometimes that's fun, sometimes it's not so much fun, but we certainly welcome it. And there are going to be some hypothetical scenarios in which we will ask your opinion about some topics. And then we're going to discuss, and I think this is really important in sort of the overall theme, your role in ensuring a welcoming environment where all individuals can thrive. What does that mean? So all of you, your fellow legislators in the Senate, people who come to work here every day, the staff, and then others who come to do the state's business here, whoever they may be, members of the public. We always want a welcoming environment where people feel appreciated when they show up to work or to show up to do whatever business they need to do. So next slide. So I think that definitions are sometimes important because we talk about things like, increasing diversity. And I think before we do that, it's important to define what we mean by that because different people have a different view of what that is. Some limit it specifically to protected classes and others, myself included, have a much more broad definition. So this is from the National Multicultural Institute. Psychological, physical, and social differences that occur within groups. And as this starts out by saying, based on things like race, religion, gender, disability status, but it's broader than that and talks about socioeconomic status, cultural background, education, learning styles and abilities, and as we talked about in the last session, which was a very lively one, sometimes diversity of thought and opinion. All of that has somebody bringing something different to the table. Equity, which is a little bit different than equality, is the guarantee of fair treatment in terms of access, opportunity, ability to avail oneself of whatever advantages there are, whether they're in employment, whether they're in education, public accommodation. Equity, generally, there's some acknowledgement that people started out from different places. Some are disadvantaged for a variety of reasons, including their background or their membership in a protected class. And what equity does is attempt to level the playing field so that everybody can take advantage of those opportunities, regardless of how, when, and where they grew up. And the next word is inclusion, which is a word I really like. Creating an environment in which any individual or group will feel welcomed, respected, supported, and valued, supported to fully participate in whatever that is, whether it's the workplace, whether it is a place like the legislature, regardless of their personal backgrounds or differences. So I like this graphic. I've been using it for a couple of years. If anybody comes up with a better one, please feel free to share it with me, but I haven't found a better one yet. So equality is basically treating everybody exactly the same. So here we have a wooden fence, people trying to watch the soccer game. Everybody gets a box in order to elevate themselves so they can see. As you can see, the little guy with his box, he still can't see because whatever he's been provided is not sufficient to get him to the same level as everybody else. Equity is in the second slide where people get the support that they need. So tall guy on the left didn't need a box. So he gives his box to the short guy, and short guy can now see, and the woman in the middle is fine with what she was originally given, which was the box. So that's the situation of equity. Level playing field, everybody can see the game. Justice is when you eliminate that barrier. That wooden fence is gone. Now we have I've only said it 12 times in the last 2 days, chain link fence through which everybody can see. So there's no longer any barrier and everybody can avail themselves of watching the game without the need for any assistance. Next slide.
So what's going on out there? There's absolutely nothing going on, right? Everything is nice and quiet in the world right now. So no matter where you work, whether it's the legislation, in an office or what have you, it's hate has no home here. We want to make sure that everybody is treated equally and respectfully, regardless of who they are and their background and their ethnicity, their demographics, etc. There are a lot of trends in the workplace right now. And this is a list of them. I'm not going to read all of them, but one of the things, there's a couple that I'd like to point out. So retaliation claims, when you had your harassment training, last week or fairly recently, there's something called retaliation claims, and they actually are on the rise. So if people are feeling discriminated against or they don't feel that they're being treated right, whether it's gender, race, any of the EEO protected classes, they can file a retaliation claim. And that's usually where somebody like myself or Charlotte will come in and do an investigation and determine what is going on in the organization or, the government or what have you, and try to help the situation. But those claims are rising on a regular basis. They're not declining. Mental health and well-being. Mental health is such an important piece of the workplace right now, where we used to say, check your stuff at the door, right? When you come into work, then this is work and there's life and there's work. Now it's integrated. I like to call it work-life integration because people are working from home. There's so much going on in your personal life that it impacts your work life and vice versa. So I like to call it integration. And people are nervous to come forward and say that they have a concern about mental health. And Charlotte's going to talk about that in a little bit in a couple of slides. What's interesting is taboo topics for the workplace are topics that you as legislators talk about pretty much every day, right? Whether it's abortion, education, guns, First Amendment, religion, climate change. This is only a partial list, but it's interesting that the things from an HR perspective were like, don't talk about things at work. You guys deal with them every day. And how do you navigate that when you have, some people's opinions can be really, really strong and drive emotion behind it because you're passionate about it. And how can you make sure that you're respectfully treating people, with respect and professionalism and civility and kindness when you have, sort of the butting heads on a situation? How do you handle that and make sure that even though you might have differences of opinion, you might not even understand where they're coming from, you might not even like the person, but how do you make sure that you are still being respectful and professional regarding the situation that you're talking about?
And one thing that I think is important with this, in terms of you all being respectful to one another, is that when you're not, it impacts the people who work here on a day-to-day basis. It impacts your other colleagues. Because when people see those high levels of negativity, strong disagreement voiced in ways that people don't look at as being constructive or sometimes appropriate, can have a significant impact on mental health, on people's morale at work. And for the individuals who are staff here, regardless of who they are, this is what they do. These are their jobs. These are their careers. This is how they earn their livings. And when they are in a place where things are particularly negative, not saying that that happens here, but you've got to be mindful of that, just as if they were seeing management in the company they work for disagreeing in a divisive and inappropriate way. And one area in which that has really come to the forefront recently is social media, where people have lost their filters. Things that one wouldn't necessarily say to someone's face, we find frequently on social media. All you have to do is look at comments to an online article, somebody's Facebook, somebody's Twitter X account, Blue Sky, whatever it may be. All of a sudden, people are saying things that are really destructive and hateful. And sometimes we have to, as attorneys, help people navigate that. So we're definitely something to be cautious and mindful of.
So
Back to you.
discrimination. So there's protected classes, which is the Equal Opportunity Commission defines what the protected classes are. And this is a list of those that fall under protected classes. So what is discrimination? Employment or other decisions based on membership in a protected class. So an example with that would be, let's say you have two people from the press. One is white and one is black, and you're only accepting questions from the white reporter and not the black reporter. You are making decisions on who can participate on a committee based on race or gender. Those would fall under discrimination. Employment or other decisions based on stereotypes or assumptions about a protected class. So an example that we like to use is if you have a committee on technology and you don't want anybody 55 or 60 or older on that committee because older people don't know anything about technology, that would be an example of discrimination based on an assumption of a stereotype. And denying opportunities to a person because of marriage to or association with a protected class. So this example is sort of office-like, but if you take the example and translate it into your environment, if you'll be able to hear what hopefully it will resonate with you. So I'm going to use Charlotte as an example. So let's just say Charlotte is the mother of a disabled child, and you're selecting her as an employee or selecting her on a committee. And she has a disabled child, and that's going to take her out of work a lot for doctor's appointments, or she might be late, or she might be missing work, or she might have to take a leave of absence. And you don't either hire her or select her to participate on a committee because of the disability of her child. So there's the association of somebody who's in a protected class, but they're not in a protected class themselves. Make sense? Any questions?
That one can get a little tricky.
Yeah.
All right, so this is our first hypothetical. And again, this is in the context of hiring, but this is an important concept for you as legislators, I think, to have some insight into, because it could come up. Tim and Miguel are the hiring managers looking to fill a number of open positions in the human resources and security departments. In a discussion with managers, the issue of demographics comes up. Tim mentions that they have trouble recruiting new workers, especially younger workers, and he's concerned that succession planning efforts will be undermined without an influx of new people with new ideas. Any problems here? Yeah. Yep. So you could have some straight up discrimination there where you are looking to recruit a certain group of people to the exclusion of others. Yeah, so that would be an issue. And, similarly, we've got this situation down here. Would it make a difference if the conversation were around the organization's DEI strategy and the need to hire more Latinx workers to increase diversity? Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So that's the stereotype piece. Exactly. And, what's important in this scenario is is it a good motive or a good strategy to try to increase diversity, to have different people with new ideas, to increase the number of individuals from minority groups? Yes, of course it's a good idea, but it would be discriminatory to say we're going to favor them over others. You're assuming this is not an affirmative action scenario. You're not required to try to get certain numbers in place. But I think very often people conflate DEI and affirmative action. Having a diversity plan or trying to increase diversity is not affirmative action or saying, to the exclusion of one group, we're going to pull in people only from a certain group. So you can't discriminate either way. So organizations, when they start talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's like, where do we begin? And I always like to emphasize trust. Trust is always needed in any type of group in order to encourage people to bring their ideas, to share their thoughts, to maybe disagree. If they're in an environment where they may be questioning motivation, like, why are you doing this diversity thing? It's only so that you can look good on paper, so you can put it on your website that you have a diversity committee. What's your plan here? Are you really going to advance more women? Are you really going to give opportunities to everyone, or is it just lip service? So people sometimes approach these things with some skepticism. They also have to feel as though they're in a place where they are safe to share their ideas without retribution, without either losing their job if it's an employment situation, being ridiculed, being ostracized or left out of things, just being treated poorly because they've disagreed with you or they've raised an issue. So we always want people to feel safe speaking up. Embracing different voices. I mean, we had a good conversation in the last session about different ideas, different ways of thinking, the technological background versus the creative background, the right brain versus the left brain, people that have a different history, grew up differently, have different life experiences to share. That only strengthens a group and hopefully brings more and better ideas. I attended a DEI training where I was a member of the class, and I thought the facilitator had a really great quote when he said, when you're talking about topics that might be controversial, don't approach it from the perspective of trying to change somebody's mind, but from a place of curiosity so that you could try to understand where they're coming from, why they think that way. Now, obviously, you folks debate, you try to bring people to your perspective, but sometimes understanding where they're coming from might help you to find common ground. And then always try to learn from our differences because we can all learn something from one another. So you'll remember that the first slide that you were looking at when you came in was DEI, where do we begin? We hope this is the beginning and not the end of the conversation. We're not going to solve everything here, but we really want to encourage more thoughtful conversations among all of the groups with which you interact here. Important to involve all stakeholders in the process. So where you're trying to create, well, we're going to work on creating a more respectful workplace, which Samantha will talk about in a few slides. We're going to work on a more diverse workforce in terms of the staff that comes here. We're going to try to encourage people of diverse backgrounds to come in and testify on bills, whatever it is that you have in terms of a goal with respect to diversity. You want to make sure that people from all levels are involved and also any kind of constituents, stakeholders that might have a view or be impacted by whatever the end result is. I had mentioned before that I was in a large law firm. We had 5 offices. They were all within an hour of each other. So they're in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, from Boston to Concord. You could get to any one of them within an hour, and every one of those had a very distinct culture, completely different in terms of what time people showed up to work, how people dressed, whether they were in the office all the time or whether they worked remotely, just a different culture based on leadership, based on who was in the room. So you have to kind of make sure that you are representing all of those different groups, bringing them all in so they can participate in whatever it is that you hope to achieve in terms of an end result.
The interesting thing, can I add something?
Yeah, of course.
Anyway, but thank you. So one of the interesting things is I have a client who has 6 buildings on one campus, and each building has its own personality and its own culture. And so it's really interesting that, you have your organization culture, but each little pocket. So I just found that interesting. So, Charlotte's situation is within an hour. Mine is on the same campus, and each one has its own personality.
And I think go back one. This all leads to this last conclusion, which is to try to create a space where everybody feels welcome and can be their authentic selves. And when I say authentic selves, not their unfiltered selves, not anything goes, but their authentic selves regardless of their background. In other words, people shouldn't have to hide who they are. Yeah, I shouldn't have, in her scenario, have to hide that I have a disabled child, which I do not, but if I were in that situation, or somebody's sexual orientation, or somebody's family background. You are who you are, and you ought to be able to bring that to work without feeling as though you're being judged for that. Next.
But I didn't mean to offend. How many of you have been in a situation where you're like, oh, I didn't mean it that way. I didn't say it that way. I know I have. I think at some point we all have, had an oops moment where you said something or typed something and you didn't mean to offend the person. And so you have the intent, but then you also have the impact. And the impact is, how does it impact the person who's receiving the information, whether it's verbal or whether it's written? And we already talked, Charlotte brought up, behind the keyboard, you have the keyboard warriors that will just like fire off an email or a text or something on social media. And sometimes it's different with the impact of a face-to-face conversation. And with that too, we also, want to be cognizant of body language, because somebody might say they're okay or they're intaking the information, but really they're not. And so you really have to look at the whole picture, because sometimes what you say, you don't mean to say it the way that it comes out or the way that it's taken. And to go back to the safe and trusted environment that Charlotte was talking about earlier, is if somebody feels that you've offended them, have a safe place for them to say that and to be able to, and not be defensive about it and, things like that. The other thing I think is important that people forget is it's not like you wake up in the morning and, it's not like Charlotte gets up in the morning and is like, oh, I'm going to get that Sam today, right? That's not really the intent. So lots of times it is not intentional. However, it still has an impact on the person nonetheless. So it's just keeping that in top of mind.
Yeah, my personal example on that, I like to use a lot of my family members as examples when I do these trainings, and they love that. But, I can remember one occasion where I said to my husband, "You hurt my feelings." And he said, "No, I didn't." And wait a minute, they're my feelings. And when you say something like, "I was just kidding," or "but it's the truth," it doesn't change the impact on me, which was to have my feelings hurt. And when we talk about things like retaliation, discrimination, and when we get to microaggressions, it is the impact on the individual. And as Sam alluded to, we do want to empower people to speak up. For example, if there's a staff person who feels as though you may have said something that offended them, we want them to be able to say, I don't think that was a very nice thing for you to say. Respectfully, we're going to always emphasize we want that to be respectful, but a correction, I think, should be welcome. And I would imagine you would want to know if you had offended someone. So we want people to be able to speak up without fear of retribution. And we're going to emphasize that over and over again, I think. So these are two terms, bias and bigotry, which get conflated often. By no means are they the same thing. So we all have bias. You might have bias in favor of something or someone or some group. You may have a negative bias towards someone, or something or some group, where did that come from? Could come from your upbringing, could come from some of the culture that you've been exposed to, your education, the part of the country that you live in. This is all part of who we are, and we grow up with these preconceived notions. Sometimes we don't even know they're there. They're not intentional. And there's certainly things that can be overcome. And the example that I've used on that is when I first became a young partner in my law firm, I found that I was mostly giving assignments to young female associates. And then I started thinking about it, and I said, gee, why are you doing that? Well, you have more in common with them. You know, you'll be more comfortable with them. And the fact is that we do tend to navigate towards people that are more similar to us, people with whom we have things in common. Maybe I felt that I had a responsibility to mentor young women. And I thought about it, and I said, well, maybe some of the younger guys might want to do this type of work and work in labor and employment. So I really had to make a conscious effort to be fair in how I doled out assignments so that everybody who wanted those opportunities would have them. Luckily, nobody had to bring it to my attention. I really thought of that myself after I found myself mostly spending time with the younger women. And when I was doing some of the evaluations of the younger men, it's like, ooh, I haven't really worked with him all that much. Bigotry, on the other hand, is intolerance, prejudice against a group, maybe favoring your own group and denigrating another. You know, we're better than you for some reason. My religion is better than your religion. My gender is better than your gender. And that's a problem because that's harder to overcome. And it is also something that is really drowning in negativity. Next. So this is a little wordle of some of the terminology that you will sometimes see in discussions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The lexicon has changed over the years. You know, we all know that different groups like to be called different things than they did 20 or 30 years ago. And I'll also admit that some of these, the first time I saw them might have been a long time ago. I actually had to look them up. And they will change. There will be more added. And I think that we all have to be open to that and mindful of that. And I think one thing that's important to emphasize is we all make mistakes. I've done it in the middle of trainings where I've said something and went, I can't believe you said that. And usually we apologize. Oh, I know I made a misstep. I never should have said that. And most people will give you grace. You know, you make a mistake once, you make a mistake twice, you're going to get grace from people. You use the wrong pronouns. Most people, you say, I'm sorry, you know, they'll correct you. You say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. You correct it in the future and everything's fine. Not always. I mean, there's always the outlier who will make a big case out of one mistake. But for the most part, I think people are very understanding that there are a lot of things we're all just learning about and getting used to, and they will give you grace. So let's talk about a couple of these definitions. The first is ally. We're hearing it more and more, mostly in the context of race discrimination, but it really fits in with everything. And an ally is somebody who takes some action against discrimination, oppression, you know, believing that it's a good thing to eliminate whatever is happening, but not being a member of that particular group. In other words, I may be an ally to a Black colleague, even though I'm not Black, and stand up in support of that person. I recently did an article on being a mental health ally in the workplace, which would mean, you know, somebody may be struggling with a mental health issue at work. I see them struggling. How do I help them? How do I maybe get them to the right resources, get them to speak up about whatever the issue is, maybe get them a leave of absence if they need it. I'm not the supervisor, but I'm a friend, a coworker. How can I help out? How can I speak up for someone? Cultural competence, it talks about, you know, an organization or an individual's sort of ability to deal with, to address, and to meet the needs of people from diverse cultures. I first learned about this term when I was on the board of a low-income medical clinic. And in that city, we had a number of refugees that had come into town and were coming to the clinic with their children. These were people who had been in camps for years and had never seen a stove or a refrigerator. So they were just, you know, completely out of sorts when they came to, you know, a relatively major northern New England city. And they would come to the clinic with their kids and they would be using the remedies that they had grown up with, home remedies. And, like it's a poultice for a diaper rash, it's a tea for a fever. And the physicians, the nurses would have to respect their culture, respect that upbringing, and the fact that they had been cared for that way by their parents and grandparents, while making sure that the children got the medical care they needed. So it's striking that balance. And being able to talk to people and address those issues without insulting them, getting them defensive, maybe making them take the child and leave the building and not come back for any more medical care, was the goal, and the cultural competence would help to get them there. Next one. So implicit bias, I referred to this a little bit when we talked about bias versus bigotry. Implicit bias, unconscious bias, they can be negative primarily, and you don't necessarily know that you have them. Did you grow up with a feeling that a certain group of people was bad, or a certain thing that you did was bad? Usually you're expressing them without knowingly doing it. And there have been a lot of studies around the brain science behind implicit bias, how you can overcome it. But the fact is that there are many real life implications to people that are harmed by it. In other words, if people have an implicit bias against a certain group, a certain age group, somebody with disabilities, the negative impact on those individuals can be significant.
So
All right, back to you.
oh, thank you. So fostering a respectful workplace. What percentage of people do you think feel respected at work? Yeah, in the U.S. In the U.S.
Let's try to just solve these.
Yeah. Under 50%, over 50%. Under, yeah. 37% of people across different industries, different demographics, different age groups, 37% of people feel respected. There was a Gallup survey. Gallup is an organization that does a variety of workplace surveys that us HR geeks like to use. But it's 37%, which blew my mind when I read it. So what makes a respectful workplace? It's civility. Something like good morning, have a nice day, have a good weekend. I started work at an organization years ago. I won't tell you where, but I had a team of 20-something. Second day in, I went around, said good morning to everybody. A little while later, one of the employees came into my office. She was like, thank you. I'm like, thank you for what? For saying good morning. I'm like, really? Something that small. And then I thought, oh my goodness, what did I just get myself into, coming to an organization that doesn't even say good morning? But those are small things that really go a long way and you don't realize it. Courtesy, professionalism, respect, all of those aspects are so important. And respect, people come to work with the expectation that they're going to be respected, right? You don't have to like them. You might not understand them, but you have to respect them. And that's what people are looking for. And when people feel comfortable and safe and respected at work, what do you think happens? They do better work. They're more productive. They give you 100, 150% of, whether it's a committee or a work or a project, and they're really engaged. And that really has a direct impact on how people are feeling they're treated overall in their actual work.
Yeah, one thing I learned when we were talking about like training younger workers or younger individuals is that especially the last two generations that are in the workplace really have a need to know like where they fit in. Where do they fit in terms of the end game? How am I going to help you if I'm working on this project? Because I don't just want to be a paper pusher. I know you're saying this is training, but I want to know, am I going to make a difference, and how am I going to do that? So explanations as to how that work fits in with the ultimate goal can go a long way towards getting people more engaged. Is this still you or is this me? Oh, it's me. Okay. So workplace civility, some of this is repetition, but positive behaviors that produce feelings of respect, dignity, and trust among members of an organization or community. How about please and thank you? Goes a long way. And, sometimes we're also busy and caught up in what we have to do, running from place to place and meeting from meeting and Zoom to Zoom, that We forget. And that can have such an impact on people who work for us. Demonstrated through manners, courtesy, awareness of rights, being aware of how people are taking things, their feelings, and avoiding conduct that's offensive, rude, demeaning, or threatening. Obviously threatening, but offensive or rude. And rude may just be not saying please and thank you, not looking somebody in the eyes, scrolling on your cell phone as they're talking to you. You know, they're trying to have a conversation with you and you're like, yep, I get it. We've all done it. We've all seen it. We've all been subject to it. Try to avoid it if you can. Next slide. So here's another hypothetical. Sam has a stutter. At committee meetings, when Sam reports to the group about the status of his projects, Walter will interrupt him and say things like, "We can't understand you," or he'll restate what Sam said. What you're really trying to say is, Sam has never said anything and others in the meeting have said nothing. A problem? What do we have here? Rudeness. Yeah,
Mhm.
yep, speaking for him, speaking for his colleagues. We can't understand you. Yep, speaking for him. Right,
Right.
right. Yeah, definitely. So definitely some incivility there. Yeah, it's humiliating. What do you think should be done in this situation? You're sitting in the meeting or you're running the meeting. What do you do in this scenario? What's an appropriate way to handle?
In public or in private?
It sort of depends, right? Right. Like if you wanted to hit it right there, like right at that moment, nip it in the bud, how would you do that? Perfect.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Respectful. Don't embarrass Walter. Why don't we let Sam finish his thought? Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Now that's being an ally, right? You're being an ally to Sam in that situation. Any other thoughts on how you might handle that? What about Walter? How do we handle Walter? Yeah, somebody has to have a conversation with Walter, probably offline. Maybe somebody has a conversation with Sam to say, "Hey, Sam, we noticed that you looked uncomfortable. Is there anything that you can do to help? We can do to help you?" Sam might say, "I really don't like presenting. Can I do my reports in writing?" And that may be fine. Or Sam may say, "Nope, I'm fine. I need to practice delivering my reports." And if that's the case, that's what we're going to do. We're going to be patient and we're going to listen to our colleague. Yeah. Right. Right. Supervisor hasn't, yeah, whether it's a supervisor or whether it's a committee chair who's, running the meeting, whoever it might be, that's the person that we're expecting is going to take the first action. And if he doesn't, then, Sam's ally is going to say, "Knock it off. We want to hear what Sam has to say." Yeah, that's okay. What do we do if it's Walter? Walter's the supervisor. Maybe there's a place we go and report it up the chain. And somebody needs to deal with that. And we'll talk about where you go. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We always want to try to, number one, be respectful. So we're not going to embarrass either one of these people in whatever is happening in this meeting. So we try to correct respectfully or ask Sam if he needs support respectfully. If that doesn't solve the issue, maybe we take it offline, have a stronger conversation with Walter, and that doesn't help, then that's when you kick it up. I think it's always better to try to resolve it at ground level and when it first happens. Yeah. Think of the right thing to say. Oh yeah, oh, I wish I'd have said that when you're walking down the hall or when you're in your car going home. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And maybe that's the time where you talk to a colleague and say, "Did you see what Walter did? What did you think about that?" And maybe brainstorm about a possible, yeah.
And in a situation like that too, if you think of something after, you can always go back to the person and say, "You know what, I've given this some thought and I'd like to talk about it a little further." Just so because if you ignore it or don't go back to it, they might keep doing it. So
Yeah, because if you ignore or you say nothing, then people are going to think what? It's fine. Yeah, you're condoning it. Yeah. And same thing if we have the situation where it's gender and Sam is Samantha and Walter is talking over her, dismissing her, restating her points, interrupting her. Not that that would ever happen to any of us, but
It's rather annoying,
yeah,
actually.
I mean, it's the same thing. It's a lack of civility. Maybe it's some gender discrimination depending upon the scenario, but
Yeah. So we've talked quite a bit about respect and civility in the workplace. So I don't want to go through each and every one of these. But being mindful, and Charlotte talked about this a little bit, is being mindful of addressing problems in behavior because they don't go away as much as you wish that they would, and you don't have to address them. Even as an ally, or if you don't know what to say, knowing where to go to get help, either, for you on how to address the situation or where to have the other person go for assistance, because it's not going to go away. It's just going to get worse. And making sure too that, you know what your own hot buttons are, and, when you need to take a step back, right? There are certain times, even when I've gotten an email and I'm like, you can tell, or even my husband, when he's typing, you can tell when he's mad because he's slamming the keys. And I'm like, you might want to put yourself in timeout for a second before you hit the send button, right? Because once it's gone, it's gone. And understanding that you might just want to take a moment before you hit the send or before you say something or do something, especially if it's driven by emotion in the heat of the moment. And the other thing too is body language. I think we talked about that a little bit earlier. We've done so many of these, I forget sometimes what I say in this one versus another training. But body language is another really important piece. Is somebody might say they're okay, but their body language is not reflecting that. And so paying attention to the whole picture, which is something that you don't get when you're emailing or doing something in writing or on the phone. Anything you want to add?
nope. All right, so the values of DE&I. So diversity reflects the differences within a group. So the very first definition that I talked about with respect to diversity both in terms of, race, color, disability, national origin, gender, all of that, but other differences as well. Equity focuses on fair treatment. And inclusion involves taking the steps to make sure that all of the members of the group feel included and welcome as part of a team. So you want to avoid assumptions. And we talked about that earlier when Sam mentioned the assuming that somebody who's older is going to be incompetent when it comes to technology. Don't assume what people want to do, are able to do, or like to do. Example I use there is, a female who has applied for a promotion, job requires travel. She's just had a baby and has another small child. And the hiring manager says, I don't know, she's not going to really want to travel. She's got those two little babies at home. It's going to be really inconvenient for her to leave them for a few days at a time or a week at a time. So we're going to give the job to the single woman or the single male who doesn't have those attachments. Now, she may have had perfectly good arrangements in place for her children when she traveled. Leave it up to her. If she's the most qualified candidate, don't assume that she's not going to want to do part of the job. Avoid thinking of individuals as diverse. We sometimes hear that he's a diverse candidate or he's a diverse representative. Hear it all the time, frankly, and people are not diverse, groups are diverse. Model equitable and inclusive treatment. See something, say something. Really important to speak up, either as an ally to speak up to end it if it's happening right in front of you, or to report it to someone who can do something about it if that needs to be done. So microaggressions, I call this death by 1,000 cuts. It is sometimes a small, aside remark. It could be snide. It could be seem like it's completely innocent. It's usually unintentional. But if you hear it multiple times, if you're the target of it, then it can really become a problem. So let's talk about a little bit about microaggressions. So Society for Human Resources, SHRM, is the largest professional association for human resource professionals. It's a global organization. They do many, many things, one of which is tons of workplace surveys. And their last survey on this was 2019, finding that 26% of individuals said that they had definitely been the subject of a microaggression at work. 36% said they'd witnessed microaggressions, and another 22% were unsure, which leads me to believe that people are not necessarily clear on what a microaggression is. So a couple months ago, I was doing a training to a board of directors, specifically on the issue of microaggressions, because that had been a problem between them and the staff of this organization. And I was doing some research and I found an article in Harvard Business Review which said top 10 microaggressions to avoid at work. And I went, okay, people always like top 10 lists. So what were they? And when I read them, about 5 of them were expressions that had been used by members of this particular board of directors. So I said, great, here we are, here's a list. So saying a Black person is articulate or well-spoken. I mean, we can all remember when Barack Obama was running for president, we'd hear things like, oh, he's such a good speaker, and he's so articulate. Like this was somehow a surprise that he would be. Claiming to be colorblind or saying you don't see black or white. Now, you can claim not to be prejudiced, but when you say, I don't see black or white, I don't see gender, I don't see race, it comes across as disingenuous. We all see characteristics of people. Hopefully we don't make decisions based on them, but saying I don't see color is something that just doesn't ring true. Asking Black men and women if they went to college on an athletic scholarship, as if they couldn't otherwise have gotten into that school. Saying we need younger people for one reason or another. I mean, if you're an older person and you're constantly hearing people in your workplace or in your organization saying, gotta get some young people in here, we're too old. Now, you may need to bring in people of different age groups, different backgrounds in order to do succession planning, in order to make sure you have people in the future. But using terminology like that really devalues the people that you have. Asking where someone's originally from if they have features of a particular racial group. Where are you from? New York. No, where are you really from? Where are your people from? That's different from having a conversation about, you know, oh, my parents are going to Italy. I understand your grandparents were from Italy. You know, where do you recommend is the best place to go to the beach? That's different. You know, you can have conversations around people's culture and background, especially if they are interested in participating in those. But kind of quizzing somebody about their background, that can be taken very poorly. Saying a woman's too emotional to be a leader. About that one. Asking a woman if you could touch her hair, or a pregnant woman if you can touch her belly. Somebody in the last group brought up even asking a lot of questions around hair, if it's an ethnic hairstyle. How long did it take you to get those braids done? You know, is that your real hair? That can be, you know, hey, if you're great friends and you're gone out to dinner and you're having a conversation about things like that, that's a little different than quizzing someone on that. Using terminology which brings in mental health. We've all done it. You know, I have many times in the past 35 years referenced the psycho client or the psycho opposing counsel. I'm not proud of it, but I admit that I did it. But using terms like, he's going to go postal if you say that, or the weather's bipolar. Not a great thing for someone who maybe has mental health issues in their background or their family, you know, to be using that terminology. Using outdated terminology with racial undertones, like let's call a spade, and dismissing complaints as misunderstandings. He didn't mean it that way. That's just Joe being Joe. He talks to everyone that way. Don't read anything into it. He doesn't mean anything by it. So you never want to excuse poor behavior. These are some other examples that I have actually had to deal with. Assuming a Latino coworker is an immigrant, complimenting their English speaking. Wow, you speak great English. Well, I'm from New York. Of course I speak great English. Asking only women or younger staff to order lunch, take notes. That should say coffee in there, little thing. You know, that can, well, we're gonna give, you know, the younger people the gopher tasks, even though it's not really part of their job, or we're gonna have women do the housekeeping tasks. Now, these are probably things that need to get done, so maybe we take turns. Accusing women or people of color of being angry or aggressive. when the same behavior is viewed positively in white men. 1984, female attorney. If I was aggressive, I was bitch. If a male did the same thing, he's a tough, strong lawyer. And that has gotten better, but that's not gone away. And telling women that they should smile more, you're really unapproachable. You're in your office, your head's down, you're crabby a lot, you look like you're just really serious all the time. You want to maybe loosen up, smile a little more. If people think that you're more friendly, they might come into your office more, talk to you, maybe ask you questions. Really not a welcome or helpful comment.
And this happens at all levels. Like one of the examples that I use is, one of the companies I was a chief HR officer, and my C-suite people were all white men. And hey, Sam, can you take notes for us? I'll take notes this meeting and you guys can alternate. Like we can alternate taking notes. I'm not going to do it just because I'm the only female of the group. And
yeah,
so
but you have the best penmanship.
Well, but those are things that actually they happen. And, hopefully you're in a safe enough place and you feel confident enough to be able to say something. But when I was younger in my career, there's no way on earth I would have said anything about that, and I would have just done it. And I would have been upset about it. But, so it does happen. And regardless of who you are and what level you are.
And very often people aren't really doing that consciously to say, let's give Sam the secretarial job. It might just be an automatic thing that they think, oh yeah, okay, she'll probably take good notes because she's probably organized, she's probably this, she's probably that. And, not meaning to offend her, but, if that happened 2-3 times in a row, I think she'd start to get pretty perturbed. All right, so last hypothetical, I think. Leroy and Mike are the only 2 African-American employees in the department. Their manager consistently calls them both Leroy. They laugh it off and joke about it at first, but after a couple weeks, they get frustrated and go to the department director to complain. So what do we think about that? Haven't learned their names. Maybe the first time you could mix a couple people up. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's disrespectful not to learn somebody's name. There may be some racial stereotyping going on there. I have told the story, I think, in every training now in the law firm that I used to work in. There were 2 women that were like a decade senior to me. So you want to talk about when there were no women in legal practice in New Hampshire. They probably joined in the mid-70s. And they were referred to by a senior partner who was also a woman, and another senior partner who was a male, as the blonde on the first floor and the blonde on the second floor. And it became somewhat legendary, and other people started calling them that. And, 30 years ago, they're telling this story at kind of a roast thing for one of the senior members of the firm. So, 30 years later, it's kind of a big joke. But, at the time, it's like these women look nothing alike. One worked in real estate, the other worked in litigation. And, the senior partners hadn't bothered to learn their names. And then it became a joke that was perpetuated by others. So, the respect of learning someone's correct name, it doesn't seem like it's asking a lot. Next. All right, this is just my little graphic that I like when I talk about things like rights aren't pie. We don't take rights from one to give to the other. I mean, the goal is that it be equitable. Next slide. We're going to talk about where you go if you have an issue. The House has a policy on the prevention of discrimination. It governs the conduct of all members of the House, but also all the staff. All staff in all of the buildings here. This is the link to where you can find it. If the conduct of a House member is at issue, you would go to the House Panel for the Prevention of Discrimination. Here's where you find that. If the conduct of a staff member is at issue, you go to the Legislative Office of Human Resources. So that kind of tells you. Now, the reality is, if you have an issue, you can go anywhere where you're going to find a listening ear. It could be Human Resources. They will get you to the right place. The Senate itself does not have a standing policy on discrimination prevention. However, discriminatory conduct does constitute conduct unbecoming of a senator. So if a senator's conduct is at issue, you can go to the Senate Ethics Panel or the Office of the Secretary of the Senate. Again, if it's a staff member, to the House, to the Office of Human Resources. And I think that does it. Wow, that's the fastest we've finished. I think we're getting better at it. Any questions, comments? All right, we know you have places to go. If anybody wants to stick around and ask questions, we are happy to talk to you. Thank you for your attention.